if you wanted an acidy, very grotesque version of The Dark Knight, this would be the movie.
Oh man, that's an itchy way to reference this film.
Yeah.
All right, welcome back to the show. I'm one of your hosts, Kyle Goethe from GoatheFilmReviews.com.
I'm Nick from the St. Paul Filmcast. Thanks for finding us. Thanks for watching. And for our loyal fans, thank you for continuing to support the show. You can follow the show on Twitter and on Instagram. Both Kyle and I are members of the Minnesota Film Critics Alliance. Check out that webpage for critics' reviews as well as ours. And today we're going to talk about the 2001 grotesque cult classic from Takashi Miike. It is Ichi the Killer.
All right. We follow the journeys of two men. The first, a Yakuza enforcer, Kakehara, searches the city for his missing boss, the only person who can satisfy his sadomasochistic pleasures. The other, a young tortured man named Ichi, a psychotic killer suffering from childhood trauma. The two disturbed individuals traverse the city, coming ever closer to collision.
Takashi is this is over 100 films on his resume. He's not only done these kind of movies where they're kind of grossing out and see how much you can take and what's your appetite for this, but he also done children's movies. He's done TV romance.
That's the crazy thing. Yeah.
He's also did I'll get him on that movie with Tarantino. I always get that
Sukiyaki Western Django.
Sukiyaki. Thank you. Why I related to Tarantino, because Takashi as Tarantino kind of relate to the same, that they present extreme violence not so much as they're reinventing the genre, but that they're mostly consumers of the byproduct of that they've witnessed themselves through other films, and basically almost a regurgitation that makes it far more grotesque than what they've been consuming. Does that make sense to everybody? It's almost like
start again. No, I get you.
They're almost in a sense a byproduct of what they've been seeing before they started making movies.
And the thing, Takashi, I think he currently holds the record for the longest or most films ever made by a director currently alive right now. I think it's in like the 200 or 300s at this point.
And he didn't do any cheat routes. He's on set.
I think he just I'd read somewhere that he likes to take any film project that comes his way. He likes the challenge. And that's why you'll see films of different genres. I also read an interesting quote with him, and I'm going to paraphrase it because I don't have it here, but where he said, "None of my films start out being ultra-violent. It's just as I start to explore the characters, I see what the characters would do, how they would interfere. Yeah. It's the characters who are violent, not me." And I think that's kind of an interesting thing when you look at films like the Categories, I think, which is this family film that he had done. He'd done all these other things, and it's like he kind of does a lot. Now, I'm only aware of him from Audition. I have not seen any of his other movies.
This came after Audition. He also did Totetsu, The Iron Man, Gonzo, Graveyard of Honor, and I'm going to put also Visitor Q, which is very much, if we will critique The Guest, very much Guest has this day from Visitor Q. A stranger comes into a family and is an enabler to their dark fantasies and to incorporate. So Takashi. What I talk about this movie is a lot of people get wrong is protagonist equals hero, antagonist equals villain. This is my demonstration that protagonist is not always the hero.
Yeah.
Takashi, Ichi the Killer is not a good person.
Yeah.
He's deeply flawed. He's deeply disturbed. There's a lot of influences they interject fake memories to get him involved, but he's not a good person. There's a movie I don't think has any hero in it. But
no, I really don't. I was just trying to think of one.
You have definitely a rivalry, which is Kakehara, who is the bad guy that actually, almost like the Joker, has cut out pieces of his face with glued, hold together by piercings.
Yeah, it's a great introduction to actor Tadanobu Asano, who, if you've watched the Thor movies, played Hogun, one of the Warriors 3 in that trilogy.
God, there's another Thor. How do you know so much about Thor? And it's one of my.
We keep talking about Thor, I guess, on our show. Yeah. I thought he was fantastic because I didn't recognize him on the poster. Of course, this being my first time watching the film, I assumed the guy on the poster was Ichi.
I know that's like a very
ironically, Ichi doesn't play a very large role in this film. You could actually probably excise him almost completely from the movie and make it just a Kakehara film, and he's kind of the thing. When you go back to Protagonist, the classical description of Protagonist is the person who pushes the story forward, the one who gets who pushes the boulder down the hill, and then the boulder is our plot. The antagonist is whatever is the opposite of the protagonist, whatever is the opposite force. So in actually many cases of current cinema where we follow the villain as he begins the story, he's kind of our protagonist, even in many other classical ways. That's why the classical, viewing of it is a little different. But
but it's just Ichi is not really the vessel. He's almost the subplot. It's interesting we call it Ichi the Killer, and he's almost forget that he's in the movie sometimes.
Yeah.
There's not a lot of softness to the movie, and that's intentional. There's always a very harsh brutality of the world and how people react to the brutality. Now, imagine the people who you perceive as victims, because in the beginning of the movie, Ichi is observing what he thinks is a rape. And rather than get involved, he gets excited about it. And that begins the movie with his name coming out of,
stuff.
It's stuff. But then he interrupts one, and she's upset because that's what she wants. And I think what he's trying to do is perception is not always reality in this movie. The protagonist is not always the good person. The villain is not always necessarily the bad person. But is not a good person, but also what we might see, brutality is something of pleasure, almost like Hellraiser. We are demons to some, angels to others. What do you prefer?
There's somewhere out there's a fan fiction of Kakahara opening the puzzle box and having a lot of fun that day.
Also, it's the delivery system, much like Tarantino. We celebrate him at the same time we apologize for it. Well, I am sorry we have guts and everything over the floor, but come on, you guys kind of like it, even though you don't want to admit it.
That's what I think the film is really aiming at, is that it is talking about the relationship between the viewer and the object that is on display. I mean, Ichi is a viewer in a lot of ways, and he's excited by what he's seeing, which is disturbing elements. And then you have Miike, who is essentially giving us, I would almost argue, a comedy in some places.
Very much so.
It's so over the top, it's viewed in a comedic fashion.
Put somebody in the television and you roll them out.
Like it's done so over the top. And the fact that, and when you look at the viewer and the viewee, even that scene where like the guy said, with the dead guy in the TV set, there are people walking along the street unbothered by it because they're so used to it. They're so used to the blood and the guts of everyday life.
And that's what he's trying to present, is how far extreme do I have to do for you to pay attention? Do I have to go this far to push sensory bouncer, push back, whatever, but how do you react to it? Ichi gets excited about it. Are you repulsed by it? Okay, that's, maybe he'll have an theology, but if you enjoy this kind of things, right? After it's been around for 20 years, I think the shock of the movie has worn off a little bit, where it seems a little bit mundane now. At the time of 2001, this was, are you kidding me? Throughout the whole process, where now it's almost cartoonish.
Well, that's the thing about it, is that the film, being my first time watching it, I didn't honestly know anything about this movie at all. Like, and I try to avoid that before I see something. It doesn't work as well now because there's trailers for everything playing all the time. But a 20-year-old movie I can kind of avoid until I'm ready to view it. The only thing was, as certain scenes happened, I started to think someone did tell me about that. The scene with the woman being tortured and her being nude and them cutting certain appendages off of her. I was aware of that years ago from a movie, didn't know it was this movie.
And what happened is something that's older than 20 years, eventually, your ears are going to hear something, pick up, read a magazine, you're going to be familiar with it. You can't completely go blind to it, to where people, when they presented at the film festival, presented barf bags, and people were leaving and protesting, and it didn't get a lot of healthy reviews, but that exasperated exactly what he wanted.
And the studio made a smart deal at the time, because they knew that America was starting to look at Asian cinema, starting to kind of pick and choose, grab some things that they wanted to remake or grab some things to carry over. And so the studio at the time actually made deals to have, American releases, UK releases of the film. They knew that they would have to cut things. And a shocking 11 minutes is cut from this film to maintain a normal release. But they also knew that in America at the time, due to the rise in DVD sales, the rise in home video sales, we were having a real moment of extended editions. We were having unrated cuts. So it didn't really matter that you brought the film out in an R-rated version in theaters, because the people that were going to be invested in it were going to go pick up the DVD and watch the gore in all of its glory.
What's interesting is Ichi's weapon is on his feet. His knives are on his feet. I always forget.
I haven't read the Kingsman comic, but I feel like that might have been like a send up to the character in the Secret Service who has the little, pokers on her feet.
It's like, how do you walk at night? It's interesting.
Seems like a dancer.
Before we get to reviews, I want to mention, because we critique High Tension, we also critiqued a lot of Gaspar Noé's films like Climax, as well as Martyrs. This is kind of the launch pad of repulsory to repulse. Very much like those films. Not for much of as a story. This does have a plot to it. Who gives a crap almost?
Overly convoluted. It felt very much like kind of how the classic noirs of the time of the 40s and 50s, they would kind of over convolute sometimes to make it so that the story wasn't as important as the character's reaction to it. This is a film that kind of does that same thing.
And so we critique what I call the French New Wave of horror from the early 2000s. This comes out in 2001, and this definitely, I wouldn't say it's not a staple of what you see at the French New Wave of horror, but this simply opened the door for it. You know, we're not going to have a pleasant experience throughout the whole process. Everything's going to be harsh. Everything's going to be almost unapologetically grotesque, disgusting, and how far can you take it before you turn it off? Yeah. So, coming up next is our full review.
Nick, can I be real with you?
Yeah.
I had fun watching this.
There you go.
I'm going to tell you right now, I'm not just saying it was, you know, a good movie. I enjoyed the overextendedness because I go back to what I said earlier. This is a comedy. Yeah. That's what it is. It is a comedy of over extremity, of confusion, of all these characters making almost, you know, kind of like over convoluting their life. I saw big, you know, recent films like Smokin' Aces and Bullet Train. I saw a lot of that.
Where the exaggeration kill shots, and then you have to clean up the mess.
Well, and tons of characters all maneuvering about. Each one kind of has like a Warriors-esque vibe, where they're part of a specific clan or group. You know, you got the guys with the little like see-through face masks and stuff. They're part of their own group and stuff, and they're all kind of coalescing.
But also that it's supposed to look traumatic. I mean, he's a waiter, Ichi, and he goes, and then his boss goes, "Kill yourself." Where you're like, what?
Hey, I've worked in the service industry. That's pretty much how it is. Like,
it's like, what? We just went to 11 with that. How do we? It's almost it's like Paul Verhoeven works with action. Yeah, it's almost a comedy. You know, you can look at Perception of RoboCop, almost a parody of itself, Starship Troopers. And I can see definitely always talk about there's a thin line between how you shoot horror films and how you shoot comedy. Different angles of how you can perceive like that. It could be ridiculously funny.
Yeah. And that's not me saying that I'm okay with rape in film, that I'm okay with like horrible massacres. What I'm saying about like the enjoyment factor of like the silliness factor at play here, in that Miike is not taking any of it seriously. He's not taking the gore seriously. He's not taking the rape seriously. Yeah. In fact, some of the characters claim that they wanted to be raped. That's kind of the fantasy for it. It's that like overindulgence, that sadomasochistic like.
Right. It's not talking about our world. It's talking about their world. Yes. I want to participate in the violence, even if I'm the victim or not. Yeah. And I think that's what people are missing the point. It's not pro-rape, but it's violence-centered, that you want to participate so much you don't care if you're the victim or the villain.
Yeah. I saw comparisons with Miike's work and Lynch's classic work, because Lynch also has a lot of films that feature violence towards women. And it's the question of, are they being feminists or are they being, like masochists about the whole thing, misogynistic, if you will. That's the question that's at play.
Uncomfortable with Blue Velvet, where she's almost enjoying it.
Yeah.
Yeah, and where Dennis Hopper is beating her. Yes, because he's always examining, and he's always talked about it, that why in Hollywood that your stories, the catalyst is always the brutality of women. Mm-hmm. Maybe, well, I'm going to talk about maybe it's not the brutality of women that she's a victim, maybe she likes it, and how dare you. Yeah. And that's not an anti-feminist point of view, that's an attack of everything that we kick out in Hollywood. Somewhere along the line, a woman gets brutalized.
Yeah, it's an inversion of, again, like he's looking at you, at the audience. He's giving you, are you content yet? Which we've said about a lot of these films, like High Tension at that too. Have you had enough? You know, we're going to over the top it. So that way you can see the elements at play here. It's a very gory, gorgeous in some fashion kind of a monster film. But it's also kind of playing with the idea that, like, this is what sells, you know?
There's an interesting book, and I always reference it a lot, Robert Hughes' The Shock of the New. And it's always, if you're going to work in shock, which he definitely is, you have to present something new as an element to advance how we do stories. This is definitely an advancement, and it's repulsive to everybody. No wonder they left the theaters for it, because it's a new avenue, and we're going to break barriers. If you're going to shock, you have to break the rules. And the rules are censorship. Well, I'll show you the whole movie about censorship. And so, yeah, interesting. Shock is always about presenting something new. And if you work in shock, he's a master at it, because it's still, like I said, it has elasticity. It's still there. People still talk about it. I don't think the initial reaction for what we saw initially in 2001 is still there. It's still kind of, But the comedy element still remains.
There are a couple, and again, like, you have to go with the idea that there is some aged CGI. Someone gets split Terrifier style. And it's very, very bad CGI. We have Shinya Tsukamoto, who plays Gigi, who is the director of Tetsuo the Iron Man, playing Gigi, the character, and he's got his CG muscle man moment right there. We have a guy's face sliced off, and it slides down the wall. Like, all these things that obviously look a little bit cheap. Of the time period, they still apparently look cheap back in 01. And it comes off with this kind of silliness factor to it that's apparent, that's there. Yeah. And when I go back to with a lot of these films, the reason why I criticize things like Martyrs, or even, I'll tell you right now, the reason why I love the Saw franchise is not because of the brutality. It's not because of the gore. It's not because of the torture. I like those stories because, in addition to the horror elements, I connect with the story. I connect with the characters. Not a lot of people do in the Saw movies, and that's why they say they don't like them that much, is because they can't connect to the story or the characters. That's why they work for me. Looking at this film, I connect with the story. Not personally, but I see what's happening in their story. There has to be something more than the gore and the torture, and this film has a lot more than the gore or torture.
But it has an element, what I talk about is when I critique great films, it's memorable and unforgettable. Mm-hmm. This is definitely an unforgettable movie. Mm-hmm. You work an element of exaggeration, you're shocking people. Is it memorable? There are actually some scenes in it that are very memorable, that you can retain, that are kind of nice and soft, and this is why I can regard it as a great movie. It's a cult classic. It's one of those things we talk about at film conventions. Have you seen this movie? I can't believe this movie exists. It's one of those calling cards if you've seen this movie and how much you appetite for kind of this genre.
Yeah. And it seems to me that sadly for Ichi, now Omori, if I'm getting that name right, sadly for him, he's not the memorable character of the film.
Ichi's not.
It seems like maybe Miike knew that as he was adapting, because it's based on the manga by Hideo Yamamoto, who I think is credited for the cinematography, but I don't know if that was just they used the manga as like the plating for that.
Something to get your credits involved or something like that.
Right? Because he was going to be the one who adapted the screenplay, but had writer's block, adapting his own manga into a screenplay and couldn't continue. So they brought in Sakichi Sato. Takashi Miike, like he knew in that kind of translation, we all care a lot more about Kakahara. We are but we're interested in him.
He's far more interesting, and that's why I got into it. The Dark Knight. Mm-hmm. The villains in Batman's story are far more interesting and need more screen time than Batman.
Yep.
And Ichi the Killer is not an interesting person. He's a flawed, disturbed person, but you have to spend more time with your antagonist here than your protagonist. And like I said, The Dark Knight's very much like that. You have a dark Ichi the Killer who's deeply disturbed, almost like Batman.
He's a guy with trauma who dresses up in a costume and goes to fight crime.
You have the flamboyant Ichi, where it's wearing colors and his face is marked up.
Instead of a tool book, he's got a boot.
He's got a boot, and you don't know if this was himself doing it or based on trauma. Somebody else did it to him.
Well, see, since he gets off on so much of that stuff, I assume it's something he had done himself. For those of you that don't know, it's known as a Glasgow smile or a Chelsea smile, and it's usually seen in a lot of British gang kind of elements, is that they would do that to you as kind of a mark. But you had to know when he shows up with that scene, he's got the two little picks in here, you had to know eventually we were going to get him out. Yeah. What an entrance for a character, because I didn't realize, I assumed those were cuts that had healed. I didn't realize that they were still open until you read the smoke come out.
Cigarette and then...
Oh man! And then that was the moment where I started to realize, I was like, I recognize this actor under the makeup, and that's how I figured out he was Hogan.
But it's the element that we enjoy. It's something we can retain. It's unforgettable. You're like, that's it. We talked a previous movie like Free Jack. It's very unforgettable, even though there's great shots and stuff about it. But it's still, I forgot about the movie sometimes, and I've seen it.
I see the elements, but I don't see the picture. You know.
Yeah. And I told you I can't remember the first time I saw Free Jack. I remember the first time I saw this movie.
I do too, but it was about 6 hours ago. So I will say this about it. I didn't notice the Batman comparisons upon initial viewing, but in the 6 hours since I watched the movie, they kind of bled into my psyche
a little bit,
of seeing the childhood trauma, even though it's fake childhood trauma for Ichi, being manifested in this, and how he sees himself almost like a Dexter-like character. You know, he's a killer, but he only kills the bad people, even though he kind of kills quite a few good people as well. Then you get Kakahara, who's the guy that, again, your characters have to be either likable or interesting. No one in the film is likable.
Not at all.
There's quite a few interesting elements at play here.
Very fascinating, because he's always on edge. You don't know when he's going to go off. Very much like the Joker in The Dark Knight. He's got an itch element to him. He's got a gang. He's very charismatic.
Like all 80s slashers, he has a particular tool that he uses for a lot of his work.
He's very charismatic but repulsive at the same time.
Yeah.
And very charming and very interesting. Yeah, wonder he's got a talent to clean a room before a crime scene. Yes.
Well, as far as criticisms go, I got a couple. I do think there's an element of a little bit too much darkness in the film, and I don't mean dark in terms of actual plotting, but I mean like some of the lighting choices contributed to a little bit of a haziness on the picture. It wasn't as well lit, where it's like some of the characters in the background, I was like, is that a guy we've met before? Like kind of like waiting for that kind of person to come out of the darkness.
There's something you don't want to talk, you don't want to have say to yourself when you're watching the movie.
Yeah, it makes you get a little bit lost in the film early on. And part of that also goes to another criticism of mine. I don't think the film sets up the initial idea as well as it could have. Once it gets going, then we're kind of, again, focused in again.
I agree with that, because the beginning is very much a shock of what we know about Ichi.
Yeah.
And you're like, where are we going to go from here? And then you get
it introduces the characters, but it doesn't introduce the plot. And it makes me go back to, so they find this dead body and then clean it up. We're in the beginning of the film.
Yeah.
That's our boss, right?
Yeah.
Did Ichi kill the boss? Part of me thinks he did, and that might be what kind of like led.
That's
them
why I
around
say
the
that
circle.
I've watched this 3 times and I don't know.
Yeah, the over.
I just know the showdown happens at the end.
There would have been a
On the
simple
rooftop,
scene or
just
two
like the
that would
rooftop,
have set up our storyline and gone in motion. It's just it's a frustrating thing because I am interested in the characters after the introduction.
I am too.
Very much not likable, but interested in them.
Yeah.
And then having the plot not push us forward in that way until about the 30 minutes. It was about actually until the scene, one of my favorite scenes in the movie, where the guy is up on the hooks.
Oh, dangling from the hooks. It looks so painful to watch.
Fun fact, that took 12 hours of makeup
Oh,
and then
good.
12 hours to shoot.
Because it looks authentic. It looks real. It looks
But it was straight out of a Saw movie. The guy's hanging there, and as he's cooking the shrimp tempura, I'm like, I know what you're going to do with that. This movie doesn't have Chekhov's gun. It has Chekhov's shrimp tempura piece, which I really do appreciate.
Right.
But, right about that part of the movie, we start to really figure out what the story is. Like, that's where it's cemented in place, but it could have happened a little earlier. Just a couple of nitpicks, but overall, like, I did like the movie. I'm not sure it's a movie I'll revisit often.
It's hard to digest. It is.
I am curious. I've never seen the prequel that was made. I think a couple years later, 2003. It was called One Ichi. That tells the story. Tells the story of Ichi in high school, I believe.
I never recognized it, but I remember that. Now that you mentioned it, it does exist.
Yeah, and I believe Ichi, the actor Nao Omori, reprises the role. It sounded like, I don't know for certain, it sounded like an animated film. So I think he reprises an animation style, which makes it easier to do. But
so you have seen the cult classic from Takashi
Miike.
I'll get it right because I used to say my.
We'll cover more of his movies. So
eventually we have to get to him. He's got one of 100.
Yeah.
So have you seen it? What do you think about it? Put down in the comments what do you think.
Yeah, and this is a rare opportunity because we're not covering someone who's directed 5 films. We're talking about someone who's directed hundreds. So what's your favorite Takashi Miike film? Both maybe the popular one and then like the less.
Oh my God, he made a TV for movie where the serial killer scoops out the head and it's a flower pot of his victims.
Is that Imprint? Is that the Masters of Horror?
And it's like every got a barcode on them. I can't remember the name of it. If you remember the name of it,
drop that down in the comments. We want to know about that.
Puts a barcode on it.
Yeah, so make sure you comment down below your thoughts on the film. We love engaging with our viewers down there, so please take the time to engage back with us. That's why we built this community, and we're happy you're a part of it.
Exactly.
Please make sure to like and subscribe to the channel as well. There are 2 free things that you can do that help support the channel immensely, and they make sure you never miss new episodes of the show as they come out. And don't forget to check that Patreon link down below as well. You get access to Picks with Kyle and Nick, The Road to De Palma. And you can help us pick films that are going to be covered on future episodes. If you hate Ichi the Killer and you don't want us to talk about it anymore, join the Patreon. Decide for yourself. And from all of us at the show, thanks for joining us. You can find all my film reviews over at GoatFilmReviews.com.
You can find my show, the St. Paul Filmcast, anywhere you find podcasts.
Are you great for shrimp?
No!